2024 was the year in which I spent the least amount of time playing video games in the last 5 years. Ironically, it was also the year where I tried to double down on this channel and regularly produce videos. But playing less in 2024 did not mean that I didn't enjoy it. In fact, I found some new all-time favorites. Still, less time spent is less time spent, but at the start of 2025 something shifted and I found new joy with this medium. So, I set myself some goals. To finally play some games I've been putting off for a long time, explore new franchises, genres, and discover the greatness of some beloved classics. In short, to play as broadly as possible. So, did that work out? Did I conquer my backlog the way I meant to? Well, come along and find out while I take you on my gaming journey through the year of 2025. In January I was still knee-deep in a game I had started in the previous October, but had only played short, sporadic sessions of. Nioh 2. Nioh 2 is an action RPG made by Team Ninja, and it's arguably the most notable game by now apart from the Ninja Gaiden series. It's often described as a Souls-like with some elements from Diablo, notably a barrage of loot. I enjoyed the first Nioh more than I expected and had been eyeing the sequel for a few years. To put it simply, I love this game. Nioh 2 is exactly what an iterative sequel should be, taking the first game's strengths and refining its edges while adding new, exciting features. The action in this game feels amazing. Not only are the controls and mechanics butter smooth, there are so many different weapons, skills, enemy types and bosses that it never gets old. I really could not praise the game's combat enough. It's honestly one of the best systems I've ever experienced, and that's not an understatement. An underrated aspect of Nioh 2 is its visual style. Rather than going for realism, the game leans into a surreal, almost watercolored aesthetic that reflects the distorted, nightmarish rendition of Japan it's set in. I especially love how it takes advantage of contrast when you are in the Dark Realm, which plunges the world into black and grey yet makes colors such as yellow and red stand out all the more. There are also sections in the game that have a serene and almost playful quality to them, which combined with the nightmare aesthetic captures all facets of a dream. Add to that a much more engaging, if still simple story, and much improved level design with so much more to discover, this instantly cemented Nioh 2 as one of my top games of the year. And it was only January. 2025 was off to a good start. Or was it? The next game I jumped into was another title that had been looming large on my list for years at that point. Unlike Nioh 2 though, this one sadly turned out to be a disappointment for me. A good, almost great game I need to say, but a disappointment nonetheless. Yes, I am talking about Prey 2017. Look, please hear me out before you destroy me in the comments. Prey is a beloved immersive sim that combines the Art Deco aesthetic and general gameplay loop of Bioshock with cosmic horror. It's a match made in heaven and tailor-made for me. Prey oozes atmosphere at every turn and offers an immensely flexible sandbox of how to approach its obstacles. Exploring the space station Talos 1, immersing yourself in the stories of its crew and finding its many secrets is pure gaming joy. Where the game disappointed me then is in its actual main story, but more importantly its combat mechanics. I won't spoil the narrative, but I'll say that the finale was a letdown to me. Even though it keeps its promises of a mind-bending, reality-shattering revelation, the endings all feel too abrupt. As for the combat, where do I begin? Fundamentally, the tools it gives you are a lot of fun. A ghoul gun that lets you freeze enemies and build cover, hacking, a variety of firearms, and alien abilities like teleporting and AoE attacks. On paper, the sandbox is amazing. In practice, however, combat ended up just being annoying to me because of the terrible visibility. I kept taking damage and never knew where it was coming from, a problem that only gets worse the more enemies the game throws at you, particularly in its later stages. And this combined with a lack of proper defensive or evasive tools just soured me on an experience I initially loved. I do hate to say it, but that was unfortunately my experience with this acclaimed game. I might return to it someday and see if I just played it wrong, but this was it for now. After this letdown, I was itching for a guaranteed hit. But before doing so, I got sidelined into a co-op game, We Were Here Forever. I had been going through the We Were Here series with a good friend of mine, and we had now finally arrived at the latest and best one. The series got better and better with every entry, and Forever is unarguably the pinnacle. The puzzles in this game are the most inventive they've ever been in the series. For many of them we had to take our time to actually shift our perception and understand them, and other puzzles were just straight up hilarious. Take this puzzle out of context and you'd think I'd gone absolutely insane.
Scheiße.
Not only were these puzzles a lot of fun, the entire aesthetic is dripping with style, and we found ourselves actually invested in some of the lore it offered. Alongside this cooperative adventure, and with the February cold outside my window, I settled into yet another game I had my eyes on for a long time. And in this case it was one I really should have played by now as a long-time fan of the Assassin's Creed series. I am talking about the one that started it all. I made an entire video dissecting the original Assassin's Creed earlier this year because of how obsessed I became with it. If any game in this video deserves the title of underrated for me, it's this one. Assassin's Creed 1 is one of the only games in the series that is actually focused on its namesake. Not only does it have the best written dialogue next to Revelations and Black Flag, full of wit and philosophical dilemmas, it is one of the only games of the series that lets you live out the assassin fantasy in full, investigating clues, interrogating accomplices, stealing guard plans. It actually feels like you're preparing for the assassinations, and it so effectively builds up the anticipation of facing the targets. Every assassination mission is unique, memorable, and somehow always leaves you thinking, was I right to do that? It's such a wonderful blend of gameplay and story. AC1 is not perfect. Its rigid structure, static cutscenes and the underwhelming kingdom area that connects the cities hold it back. Yet it just does not get enough credit for what it does, not in the slightest. I could go on about how much I love the setting and its dense atmosphere, the perfection of the parkour system, Jesper's soundtrack of course, the wonderful integration of the modern day story, but since I've already made a dedicated video about the game, I'll leave it at that. Fired up by my enthusiasm for this game, I immediately felt the urge to replay the entire Ezio trilogy, starting of course with Assassin's Creed 2. AC2 was the first actual AAA game that I played as a youth, and it was my most formative gaming experience. The setting of Florence, Venice, Ezio's character arc, the parkour system, again Jesper's masterful soundtrack all made me fall in love with it back in the day. Revisiting it now again, after having played it more than I can count, with the context of its prequel in mind, was a revelation, and not necessarily just in the positive sense. I still love AC2, how could I not, but I was shocked by how much it actually discarded the grey morality and philosophical themes of the original in favor of a traditional story of good versus evil. Gone too were the investigations in favor of more set-piece driven missions. I had never known what a shift in direction AC2 had been from the original, and it was a jarring realization. As I said though, my love for it still stands, even if it's slightly neutered now. Much was gained, and much was also lost. But now, at the end of February, following my streak of playing games that have been sitting in my pantry for far too long, another long-awaited meal was finally on the menu. An experience that would dominate my gaming sessions for months to come. A game that will prove to be an unforgettable experience. Sometimes you play a game that simply transports you into its world so much you hardly want to leave it behind. Cyberpunk 2077 did exactly that for me. I lost myself in Night City, its beautiful neon-drenched vistas, the stories of its inhabitants, the music blasting through the radio while I was cruising through its streets, and the deeply satisfying gameplay loop. As a huge fan of the cyberpunk genre, Blade Runner and the Ghost in the Shell movies rank among my favorite films of all time, I was an easy target for this game. Far removed from its tumultuous launch and the long road to reparation, I was able to enjoy it in full, as it was meant to be. Without a doubt, it's the most immersive game I've played this year, and quite possibly my favorite too. To this day, I still feel its allure calling me back. All through March and April, Cyberpunk was my fixation as far as gaming went. But I did play something else too, and it was quite a random pick. Evil West. Often called a quintessential 7 out of 10 game, Evil West is a throwback to a simpler era of shorter, more linear games that did not waste your time and beckoned to be replayed just for the fun of it. It's a 10-hour action-adventure where you play as a cowboy taking down hordes of vampires in an old-school and over-the-top Wild West setting. For me, this was a perfect palate cleanser in between my Cyberpunk sessions, and while definitely flawed, it never overstayed its welcome. Cyberpunk swallowed up most of March, but even in April I wasn't quite done, and the best was yet to come. Phantom Liberty. I'll smash through the door and say it outright, this expansion was the absolute best thing I've played all year.
Wires and chains, starting to fade.
Phantom Liberty is Cyberpunk 2077 charged at 100%. From its first second to its last, it tells such a cinematic and engaging story about loyalty and the desperate attempt to survive a system that abuses and discards people without remorse. It's a true spy thriller that rivals the very best of its kind, and it takes place in somehow, an even more immersive part of Night City, with such a human cast of characters, such a staggering variety and quality of missions, and oh so bittersweet endings. Not only that, it also offers some fantastic side missions and additions to the core gameplay. Honestly, I struggle to comprehend how Phantom Liberty is even real. You just stop seeing the code holding it all together, it is that immersive. Coming back to regular old Night City after Phantom Liberty and its devastating endings felt like waking up from a dream. And just like after waking up in real life, there are still things to do. So I finished up the base game, spent some more time in Night City, and then looked forward to something new in May. Wait, what? What do you mean it's June already? That can't be right. How did that... Oh. I ended up doing absolutely everything you could possibly do in Cyberpunk. This game definitely made a good chunk of my 2025, but now it really was time to move on. For real. I continued the spirit of my excursion into the Evil West with another short and sweet adventure, Call of Juarez Gunslinger. A little 3-hour romp full of bullet time, first-person shooting in a less fantastical yet equally unserious setting. It has a fun, unreliable narrator that keeps changing facts about the story, reshaping the level around you in some cool ways. This little gem was actually made by Techland, who are more known for their Dying Light games, but this game showed that they've had the source for a long time already. But then, it was time for another hard pivot. What would it be this time? Maybe you recognize the music already. Oh yes, it was time for my Nintendo arc. A year earlier I had borrowed a friend's Nintendo 3DS and a copy of The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask 3D, the first Zelda game I would ever play. I had started it but dropped off rather quickly because I was too impatient to understand it. In the rising heat of this summer though, I decided it was finally time to give it another chance. This time I did get into it and enjoyed it a fair amount. The quirky yet distressing atmosphere of it, the creative puzzles, Metroidvania elements, and most of all the mesmerizing soundtrack. All of these things made me ultimately appreciate the game a lot more. As for Majora's Mask's infamous 3-day cycle mechanic though, where everything follows a schedule that you have to reset, I appreciate what it does for the game's themes and the pressure it applies to you, yet in the end I've just found it to be a nuisance more than anything else. I walked away from the game both satisfied but also glad to be done with it. On the same day when I started Majora's Mask, I also started playing a game I never thought I'd play. Super Mario Galaxy. I played New Super Mario Bros. On the Nintendo DS as a child, but otherwise I had never been that interested in the franchise. But when a few of my friends played and adored the Galaxy games, I was intrigued and jumped in. And wow, Super Mario Galaxy is such a fun game that is so easy to get into, doesn't require a lot of commitment from you and radiates joy and creativity in every moment. June was a super busy month for me, so the short but sweet levels this game offers were just perfect for me at that time. And it's honestly staggering how consistently the game comes up with new and interesting challenges. It's definitely one of my favorite games I've played all year, and I cannot wait to play the sequel someday, which is supposed to be equally good, if not better. I almost forgot to mention this, but I also started playing Max Payne in June, another legendary classic that I've had my eyes on. It's clearly a game made on a budget, but it uses that to its full advantage. Instead of awkward looking real-time cutscenes, it goes for these comic-style slideshows that fit the game's noir aesthetic perfectly. The gameplay also feels surprisingly good. Dolphin diving in slow motion around a corner and catching enemies off guard just does not get old. Unfortunately, I reached a point where the gameplay started to annoy me and it got a bit repetitive too. My friends said that I just should not have played this with a controller, but since the game is still not available on PC here in Germany, it was banned back in the day, I couldn't switch over to mouse and keyboard, and feeling demotivated I let Max Payne fade from my view, even though I enjoyed it a fair amount, to be honest. But with that, June was done and it was time for the weirdest month of my year, as far as gaming goes. The first game of July is not something I'm particularly proud of, but it happened. During an online class that took place over a weekend, all day, a class full of presentations I struggled to stay interested in, I booted up a game that I knew was just mindless fun. A game I could play while still listening to the class with half an ear. That game was Borderlands 3, which I had also started a long time ago but never finished. I ended up completing the main story this time around, and it is indeed pure junk food in gaming form. Easy to consume and enjoyable in the moment, but not exactly filling or satisfying. To be clear, Borderlands 3 has some excellent gameplay with impactful weapons, smooth movement and a diverse set of abilities. The loot is frankly insane. At every corner you get showered with new and interesting weapons. I also want to give a shout out to the soundtrack, which is filled with tracks I could headbang to. However, everything that everyone has already said is true. The story and dialogues here are insufferable, absolutely unbearable. Exploration is also much more frustrating than it should be, with the total handicap of the map. Still, the gameplay is fun enough to carry the experience above these issues. In my Borderlands fever I also randomly played the Captain Scarlet DLC for Borderlands 2, a fun little diversion but nothing more. Next up was another diversion, and a quite random one at that. And also by far the most infuriating game I've played all year. An absolute classic that started a long-running multimedia franchise that's still as alive as ever, 40 years later. You've heard the music, you know what this is. It's the original Super Mario Bros. From 1985, one of the most influential games ever made. HowLongToBeat.com lured me into thinking this game would just be 2 hours long, but boy did that gaslight me. This game is a masochist's wet dream. Not only is it super difficult thanks to its floaty mechanics, but it's also essentially a roguelike. It has 8 worlds that have several levels each, and you start out with 3 lives. And if you lose all of them, it's back to the very start. And let me tell you, these levels have absolutely zero remorse. I think I got to World 4 regularly at some point, but any further felt impossible. I just had enough of it and started abusing the hell out of the shortcuts and save states. I honestly don't know if I could have beaten it the normal way. Anyways, I appreciated Super Mario Bros. For its importance, but damn did I hate playing it, oh my god. After that ordeal, it was time for something I was sure I would like. The first game released in 2025 I would play, and a sequel to a game I adored. A game that frankly did not need a sequel, but those trailers looked so good I could not help but be excited for it. Yes, I am talking about Death Stranding 2 on the beach. My wonderful friends actually got together for my birthday a month before release and made a custom box for it with an €80 gift card to buy the game when it would come out, which I couldn't thank them enough for, really, such an awesome gift. So in the middle of July, exam season, I started playing this behemoth. Once again I was swept up by the wonderful gameplay loop, the needle drops and the beautifully directed cutscenes. However, the more I played, the more the cracks started to show. Death Stranding 2 sands back a lot of the more tedious aspects of the first game in favor of fun and accessibility, shedding much of the horror and tension in the process. BT and human enemies are no longer a real threat, and the truck obliterates any and all challenge that the terrain might present. It basically feels like late game Death Stranding 1 without any of the satisfaction of getting there. On top of that, the story, while certainly full of highlights, often felt like a retread of the first game, even a retread of Metal Gear Solid, to the point of feeling like a parody. The game won me over again with its spectacular finale, but the damage was done. Despite Death Stranding 2 being a lot of fun to play, I just didn't connect with it nearly as much as I did with the first game, and I left the experience underwhelmed. But I am clearly in the minority with this opinion, as DS2 is still one of the highest rated games of the year across the board, much higher than the first game. While I was still trucking away in the Australian outback, I played some other, shorter games in between. I finally finished up a replay of one of my all-time favorites, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, and almost became obsessed with the little indie hit Balatro. But then it was time for another classic. The first entry into a long-running series that I've been a fan of for years, but only now did I finally have the chance to experience its beginning. The original God of War from 2005. It's a game of bloody combat and brutal finishes set in a wonderfully juvenile rendition of Greek mythology. I made a whole video about my experience with this game, so I'll keep it brief here. God of War has some rough edges, but I still really enjoyed my time with it. The combat is as good as I expected, but I was also rather impressed by its puzzle design and charmed by its over-the-top storytelling. I liked it enough to even go for a Platinum trophy, completing a speedrun playthrough and Challenge of the Gods, which still gives me nightmares, to be honest. July was easily the biggest month for games for me as far as variety and playtime went, but August would prove to be just as exciting of a month for me as I revisited an old favorite of mine, gave a game I liked another closer look, gave a game I dropped entirely another chance, and finally played an absolute classic of survival horror. Sifu was the first game I played in August, and it's a super cool, kinda indie game that had been on my radar for many years. It's hard to think of another game that so perfectly captures the kung fu fantasy as many of us know it. Not only is the combat incredibly satisfying to engage with and master, the sheer aesthetic prowess of this game should also not be overlooked. It seamlessly transitions from realistic spaces to surreal dreamscapes, using its environment to tell the stories of your adversaries, and just always knows how to present its fights in the coolest way possible. It's an absolutely brutal game that has thrown off many people through its semi-roguelike structure, but for me, finally beating it was incredibly fulfilling. Straight from that, I completed my revisit of the Ezio trilogy from Assassin's Creed with Revelations. And I might ruffle some feathers here, but I believe this might just have become my favorite of the three. I will admit, Constantinople lacks variety between its districts and the tower defense minigame. I don't really care for it. Yet at the same time, this is easily the best parkour has ever been in the series, and it tells one of the best stories in all of AC too. Revelations used to be my least favorite of the Ezio games, but with every replay, my appreciation for it only grows. Being true to my goal that I set for myself at the start of the year to play more classics, I next set out to play a game that seemed to have an impossible aura around it, one that made it daunting to approach. Silent Hill 2 has often been heralded as one of, if not the best survival horror game ever made, and it has always loomed large over my head with every survival horror game I played. I finally had the chance to play it, and I won't mince words, it's an absolute banger. It shot straight up my list of favorites of the year, right between Cyberpunk and Nioh 2. Playing Silent Hill 2 is such a contrast to the conversation around it. Where the discussion is loud and ecstatic, the game is quiet, harrowing and introspective. For most of the game it's not scary in any conventional sense, but the psychological horror slowly seeps in and takes hold of you. Going through the fog-ridden and abandoned streets of Silent Hill was such an immersive experience, and I love taking my time to figure out its puzzles, taking notes along the way. On the storytelling front, it's really as good as everyone says. Barring the awkward voice acting, which didn't quite work for me despite being in tune with the rest of the game's strangers, yes, but something was a bit too off for me. I'm not that well versed in classic survival horror games, but I can hardly imagine that it gets much better than this.
In my restless dreams, I see that town, Silent Hill.
With this satisfying experience under my belt, I started driving into a completely different direction. Instead of a beloved classic, my next stop would be at a much more contentious game. One that I had bought many years ago and had always vowed to myself to give a proper chance to someday. And well, that day had finally come. I gave Final Fantasy XIII another chance, and this would be the make or break moment. I can't even remember where my fascination with this particular entry came from, but it must have partially been because of its strange status in the series. In any case, I started taking a proper bite of it, and boy was I in for a wild ride, let me tell you. At times, I love this game, its quirky characters, strange but satisfying combat system, and most of all, its music. Again, I'm a sucker for good music, what can I say? At other times, I despised how endless and repetitive many of its chapters were, how unbalanced the combat felt. After about 22 hours, I arrived at chapter 11, and also at my breaking point. It's a part of the game where it takes a hard turn away from linear levels to a massive hub world, and it's a point where many people think the game gets good. Well, for me, this was the absolute low point of the entire game. The difficulty spikes sharply and forces you to grind side missions that are mind-numbingly boring and only do the bare minimum narratively speaking. With a heavy heart, I eventually dropped the game because I simply did not enjoy it. It was an important lesson because I pride myself on finishing the games that I start. Final Fantasy XIII humbled me and made me reflect on how I spent my free time, and for that I am grateful. To take my mind off this frustration, I started replaying Doom 2016 in late August, and what a necessary diversion it was. The first time I played it, I liked it, but as later I was dragged, as the drip feed of new abilities, guns and enemies subsided. But this time I had a blast from start to finish. I also think that playing it with mouse and keyboard instead of a controller, as I had done the first time, significantly boosted the fun factor of the combat. There's really not much else to say about this one. It's just a really solid shooter with some admittedly awkward exploration, but a cool factor that is hard to match. September turned my life upside down, as my schedule became much fuller thanks to an internship I was starting. Still, I was dead set on playing one particular game and immediately making a video about it, Hollow Knight Silksong. The video, it didn't do so well, but the game itself was in many ways a triumph. I have to say that I have soured on it over time thanks to how deliberately tedious and unfair it likes to be. This is something I would attribute to me playing this at a time when I needed to use my free time to reduce stress, not increase it, and that's what this game did. So I must emphasize this. I still leave Silksong to be a wonderful continuation of an already stunning game. The sheer amount and quality of different areas, bosses, music, and the smoothness of the gameplay are nothing short of extraordinary. Getting lost and finding your way again feels just as good as it did in the first game. At the same time, I would argue that the world of Silksong is less interesting and awe-inspiring than in the original, but that's a high bar to clear. In between my Silksong sessions, I finished up my replay of Doom 2016 and also spontaneously revisited another game that had previously frustrated me. A game that I knew I should love deep down, and that game was the original Ratchet & Clank from 2002. I had played it on a PS Vita years prior, where the lack of checkpoints and horrendous controls, full of input lag, ruined my experience. Playing it now again on a PS3 with a proper controller made all of the difference. Some sections are still rather fiddly and the controls are not entirely in your favor, but these issues didn't detract from how fun the writing is with its tongue-in-cheek humor, how memorable the planets and the soundtrack is, and simply how enjoyable it is to explore these levels. From what I've heard, the next games in the series only refine the formula of the first game, which only makes me more eager to play them too at some point. And definitely not on the PS Vita. September wasn't quite over yet though. After the satisfying but exhausting experience that was Silksong, I needed something to relax. And what better game to do that than one about climbing up an impossibly tall mountain, handhold by handhold and step by step. Jusant had been on my radar for a long time, not only because it was made by Don't Nod, makers of Life is Strange, one of my favorite games, but also because of how gorgeous it looked. It did not disappoint. Jusant was a very fun game, full of surprising variety and depth in its gameplay, and a wonderful score that warmed my heart. And still, the end of September had one more thing in store for me, something I had been excited for but then resentful of the ceaseless praise it received. Something I needed to intentionally choose to start instead of putting it off any longer. Because either way, tomorrow comes. As tomorrow came, so did October, and my October was dominated by a game that hardly requires any introduction, Clair Obscur Expedition 33. And wow, I hardly know where to start with this one. From its very opening, Clair Obscur had a hold on me with its art style and soundtrack and the first words that were spoken. It's one of those moments that you just don't forget, and the game had so many more of those in store for me. No other game I've played this year has told such an affecting and thought-provoking story with so much style and substance, except maybe Phantom Liberty. The way it explores themes of grief and our relationship with art is so stunning and poignant from the first second to the last. The dialogue mostly treats you with respect, letting you make your own interpretations of its subtext, which is such a refreshing and unfortunately rare thing to say about writing in video games. I will say that not all aspects of the story worked for me. Notably some characters like SK, I just did not like him. And also the relationship system that's so common in JRPGs feels tacked on here. These issues are so minor though in the face of what this game achieves with its narrative. I also loved the combat, even though I was sometimes overwhelmed by the Lumina system and felt paralyzed as to how I should build my characters. But I could not talk about this game without mentioning the music, because oh my god. I started this game at the end of September, but I still listen to the soundtrack on repeat to this day. I finished the main story in mid-October, but I continued to play it until December when I finally beat the game's hardest boss. And then they went and dropped a new update with an even harder version of him. Cheers, Central Interactive. Cheers.
And now for something completely different.
At the back end of October, I had another random impulse. This time it was to play SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated. It really couldn't have gotten more random than that. I am not a SpongeBob fan, hell I never even watched the show as a child, but during one of Steam's Next Fests I played a demo of the newest SpongeBob game and I liked it, which led me to play this one, which I had because of PS Plus. It was a good time, I had fun with it, but I don't really have much else to say about it. With temperatures declining more and more outside and as autumn stepped into its prime time, I decided that November would be the time to cozy up with some old favorite franchises of mine. Yakuza has quickly become one of my favorite series in gaming ever since I first played Yakuza 0 in 2021. 4 years and 9 games later, it was time for the next one on my list, Lost Judgment. Once again, I settled into the familiar rhythm that all of these games follow, even this detective spin-off series. A dead serious main story full of adrenaline-inducing fistfights mixed with the goofiest side activities imaginable. Combat was as fun as ever, with one of the most flexible systems the series has ever offered. The story too was another winner, just like the first Judgment. This time focusing on the flaws of the Japanese justice system and how far someone would be willing to go to exact justice on their own. It's a deeply compelling story with some of the series' finest antagonists. I do wish though that the protagonist Yagami had just as much of a personal arc here as he did in the first game, which he doesn't. I don't feel an overwhelming love for either Judgment or Lost Judgment like I do for some of the mainline games, but they are undoubtedly great games with satisfying combat, some fun side activities and banging soundtracks. On the heels of the main game I also played the expansion, the Kaito Files, that centers on Yagami's partner Kaito, which tells a compelling story in 4 tight chapters and feels like a nice epilogue to what is probably the end of the Judgment series. The franchise is in a rough spot at the moment, with the upcoming remake of Yakuza 3 looking like an absolute disaster, but these games still hold a special place in my heart. It will not be the only franchise that I will return to in November though. If you've watched this far, you know that I have a soft spot for Assassin's Creed, and while my relationship to the newer games is complicated, I will always be interested in what happens to the franchise and where it's going. One time it tried to go straight back to its roots with a stealth-focused, parkour-focused experience. A game like the AC of old, Assassin's Creed Mirage. My first impressions were great. Baghdad was vibrant and immersive, the stealth and parkour surprisingly good, and the story compelling enough. Oh, how I wish that these first impressions would also be my last, but they were not. Slowly, as the game went on, my enjoyment declined into tolerance and ultimately into resentment. After the promising start, the writing became mind-numbingly boring, which in turn made the repetitive missions boring, and even the decent gameplay failed to carry the game's weight. Story-wise, it's a pale imitation of AC1 with none of its qualities. Gameplay-wise, it's a dumbed-down AC Unity. So, what are we doing here? Importantly though, the game received a free DLC called Valley of Memory right before I played it. And that DLC is actually really damn good, with an actually engaging, character-focused, motion-captured story and good mission variety. I wish the whole game was like that, but it wasn't. And so, by the end, even the wonderful recreation of 9th century Baghdad could not keep me from resenting Mirage deeply. This couldn't be how my 2025 in gaming ends, could it? While I was still chipping away at Mirage, I started playing a little puzzle game called Viewfinder, but neither have I finished it, nor was I particularly impressed by it. I also started playing Returnal, one of the initial flagship titles for the PlayStation 5. I'm also still playing that one, but my impressions are definitely a lot more positive. It's a roguelike, so every death feels utterly demoralizing and demotivating. Even more so because runs feel much more similar to each other than in other games of its kind, like Hades. Still, Returnal's combat loop is intoxicating, and its aesthetic is a weird mix of Alien and Edge of Tomorrow that is exactly my thing. December would end with one final game I would start right before Christmas, one that would promise to be another long journey. That game was Divinity Original Sin, which had been on my radar for a long time, and a bundle of both Original Sin games selling for €10 was a deal I didn't want to refuse. CRPGs are way outside of my usual comfort zone, but Disco Elysium opened that door for me, and here I am, and I'm curious where it will lead me. After all, my 2025 didn't end on a total downer gaming-wise, and I was eager to continue playing both Returnal and Divinity Original Sin throughout January and perhaps beyond. By the time I'm actually finishing up this video, I unfortunately dropped Original Sin, but that's a topic for another video. These were all the games I played in 2025, 34 in total, including expansions and games I've only started. I actually ranked all of the ones I finished in a list on Backloggd, which I'll link down in the description below. Looking back, 2025 was a year where I did finally jump into some absolute classics like the original Silent Hill 2, God of War, Majora's Mask and Super Mario Bros., all of which were worth my time in their own ways. It was also sadly a year of some major disappointments like Prey 2017, Death Stranding 2 and Assassin's Creed Mirage. At the same time, however, I also found some absolute new favorites, chief among them of course Cyberpunk 2077 and Clair Obscur Expedition 33. I'm also glad I revisited so many games because of how much it changed my perception of them. Lastly, I like to think I succeeded in my pursuit to play a variety of games from old to brand new across many different genres. I'd say 2025 was a good year for me. For 2026, I have my sights set on a few must-plays that I hope to get around. But you know how it is with plans. Sometimes they work out, often they don't. And that's fine. Either way, I'm excited for what the future brings, the new favorites I might discover and the wild, unexpected turns I might take. And maybe I'll see you here again next year. Have a good one.